And anytime they raise these monies, everybody hailed them. But what was behind it? What is behind every raise is that the entrepreneur founder is diluted significantly. We had a very interesting session, and in one of the sessions, there was a role play about a case study on CWG PLC, which is a company that I founded. And the case was written by Columbia Business School to discuss a point about venturing, about entrepreneurship, and about funding for the enterprise. And the case ended on the question, should Austin Okere take the venture capital investment or should he reject it? Just a little bit of background. So this is a company, CWG, in 2005 that was doing very well. It was riding on the back of the Y2K that just happened at the turn of the century, was riding on the back of the telecom boom that happened immediately after the civilian government of OBJ and GSM was launched, was riding on the back of the bank consolidation in 2005 that was done by Governor Soludo. And in each of these booms, CWG had positioned and taken good advantage. So this is not a company that was in dire need of cash or was desperate in 2005. But we had a plan to list our shares on the stock market, and we thought that the best way to do it was to first do either a private placement or, better still, to do a venture capital fundraise so that they will bring discipline into our operations, governance, strengthen our governance, and of course, bring more technical knowledge. And if people saw that this company was invested in you, probably it will make the listing on the stock exchange more attractive. The issue here is at what price? And I remember that I've discussed something similar on this on social media, where many Nigerian young companies were celebrating, wow, we raised Series C, we raised Series D. And anytime they raised these monies, everybody hailed them. But what was behind it? What is behind every raise is that the entrepreneur founder is diluted significantly. So if I use CWG as a case study, the case that was written by Columbia was that there was an offer of $8 million for 25% of the company, putting the valuation post at $32 million. Make no mistake, the Treasury bill's interest rate is 15% sometimes. Now, if someone is going to bring his money to invest in your company, he's looking for way more than that 15%, given that there's a high risk that his money will not come back. And the rule of thumb is that they're looking for 3 times what they brought in within 5 years. So in our case, they were going to be asking for $24 million within 5 years, or you list and give them a liquidity event or an exit. You have to check very well that this $8 million that you're taking in, you can do business in such a way that the value of the company can cough out $24 million in 5 years, regardless of exchange loss. Here is where it gets complicated. So you receive $8 million, which is converted.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for joining us on Early Exchange on Sook News. I am Blessing AG. Resolution is a resolve towards a thing. For some, they wait for the 1st of January every year to make a resolution. For some, it is monthly. But I think it will work better if it is a daily thing, because changes happen on a daily. So what have you resolved to do today? While you're preparing to give me an answer for that, well, there's been a new development here. You see that man that used to sit beside me called Aya Jimmy. Well, today is behind the cameras looking at me while Femi is here this morning. Good morning, Femi.
Good morning, Blessing. What a privilege to be here this morning. I'm so delighted. It's a beautiful time. It's a beautiful day. What a good time to be with a beautiful Blessing. For our viewers out there, it's a beautiful day, a good time to spend this morning with us, where we talk about business, we talk about finance, we talk about developing economic issues around the world. And what a time to stay with us and start your day with us. So if you're ready, we are all ready. And I want you to sit back there and get set as we start the ball rolling. Blessing.
Oh yes, if you notice that Femi kept talking about time, that's because that's one thing we have to be very mindful of. And being mindful of time, we'll go over now to Olaoluwa Awe, who's ready and not wanting to waste any time in updating you with current happenings around the globe. Good morning, Ola.
Yes,
you look beautiful.
Thank you very much, Blessing Eiche. Thank you, Femi. It's nice to have you join us on the early exchange. Of course, no time to waste. This is the morning news update. I am Olaoluwa Awe. There are exciting developments in the world that could inform your business decisions today, so stay tuned. After nearly 4 decades since its proposal in 1983, the long-awaited Blue Line Rail mass transit in Lagos State has finally commenced commercial operations. Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu took the inaugural ride on the newly inaugural rail system traveling from Marina to Mile 2, marking a significant milestone for the city. This transportation system is expected to revolutionize commuting in Lagos by accommodating about 500,000 passengers daily and alleviating the city's traffic congestion, with fares ranging from 400 naira to 750 naira to cater to diverse commuter needs. And Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has endorsed the revival of the Jigi Bola program aimed at providing eyeglasses to 5 million Nigerians. The initiative, originally launched during Tinubu's tenure as governor, offers free eye screening, surgical procedures, and eyeglasses to combat preventable blindness in the state. This revitalized program is a collaboration with the Federal Ministry of Health's National Eye Health Program and the Peak Vision Foundation, and it includes the introduction of a national policy document on eye health for enhanced eye care services in the country. And moving on, Nigeria's value-added tax VAT collections reached a total of 781.35 billion naira in the second quarter of 2023, marking a 10.11% increase compared to the previous quarter. Local payments contributed the most with over 512 billion naira, followed by foreign VAT payment with over 142 billion naira and import VAT with over 126 billion naira during the same period. Among sectors, extraterritorial organizations and bodies experienced the highest growth rate at 212.06%, while activities of households as employers and certain other sectors saw negative growth rates, with agriculture, forestry and fishing at a combined 32.86% loss, while manufacturing, information and communication and financial insurance activities were the leading contributors to VAT collection. VAT collections in the second quarter of 2023 showed substantial year-on-year growth of 30.19% compared to the same period in year 2022. And the Lagos State Governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, has launched the distribution of food supplies to 500,000 vulnerable households in the state to mitigate the impact of fuel subsidy removal. 2 categories of households will receive the essential food items, which includes 50 kg of gari and 100 kg of beans for the first category, while the second category will receive food boxes containing 10 kg of gari and 5 kg of beans. A monitoring committee from various sectors will ensure transparency in the distribution process. Now, the man who led Gabon's military junta, Brice Nguema, has been sworn in as interim president following last week's coup that removed President Ali Bongo Ondimba. Nguema's tenure duration remains uncertain as discussions about reforms and the transitional period continue. A swearing-in was celebrated with a military parade and strong support from civilians. Before his inauguration, Nguema allowed Gabon's borders to be reopened and held talks with political leaders to discuss reforms and the length of the transitional period. Meanwhile, Niger has reopened its airspace for civil and commercial flights after closing it on the 6th of August due to a perceived military invasion threat from neighboring countries following a coup. The decision excludes military and special flights, which require authorization. Economic sanctions imposed by ECOWAS may still limit flights to the country. And moving on, Tanzanian officials have withdrawn proposed amendments to 2 key laws related to natural resources, signaling a re-evaluation of the DP World Port Management contract. The intergovernmental agreement between Tanzania and Dubai allowed DP World to take over operations at the port of Dar es Salaam, but the contract has faced public condemnation and legal challenges, with critics arguing it would benefit the Dubai Corporation more than Tanzania. The proposed amendments aim to ensure that these laws wouldn't hinder the performance of sea, dry, and lake ports in Tanzania. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa, who was inaugurated after a disputed election, has accused external forces of attempting to sponsor election-related chaos. He was sworn in before a crowd of supporters, although the main opposition, the Citizens Coalition for Change, boycotted the ceremony and called for fresh elections. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa attended the inauguration, which was seen as an endorsement despite regional concerns about the election's fairness. President Mnangagwa vowed to improve the living standards of the poor and uphold the constitution, acknowledging the challenge of uniting a divided nation. Protests erupted in Nairobi against the Africa Climate Summit, with demonstrators claiming it has been co-opted by multinationals and Western governments. Organizers of the protest argue that the summit's agenda is dominated by pro-Western corporations and philanthropic organizations, sidelining critical issues and people affected by climate change. They are demanding an African-led expert group to reshape the summit's agenda, a focus on renewable energy, transparent dialogue between citizens and policymakers, and adequate climate funding. We move now to the Middle East and other parts of the world right after the short break. Stay tuned to the morning news updates. And welcome back to the morning news update. Once again, I am Olaoluwa Awe. Now we move to the Middle East. The United Arab Emirates has announced new regulations that prohibit heavy vehicles weighing over 65 tons from using its roads, effective from next year. This move is part of a federal law aimed at regulating vehicle weight to preserve infrastructure and enhance road safety. The decision was made during a cabinet meeting where the creation of a federal regulator for water and electricity was also announced. Still in the UAE, the cabinet has introduced a new system for employees in the private sector and free zones to invest their end-of-service benefits, which will be optional for workers to join. The system will establish a savings and investment fund overseen by the Securities and Commodities Authority in coordination with the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization. This initiative aims to protect workers' savings and ensure safe investments, providing stability for their families. Additionally, government employees can participate in the scheme, addressing concerns about the adequacy of gratuity as a retirement fund. And Emirati astronaut Sultan Al Neyadi has safely returned to Earth after spending 186 days in space. is splashed down in the SpaceX Dragon Endeavour in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Jacksonville in Florida. The mission, which marked the longest Arab space mission in history, conducted over 200 experiments and had a significant educational and outreach program that inspired audiences and students in the UAE and worldwide. And moving on, India has successfully launched its Aditya L1 spacecraft, marking its first solar mission. This achievement follows India's Chandrayaan-3 rover's recent successful landing on the moon's south pole, making India the first country to do so. Aditya L1 will travel 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, taking about 4 months to reach its destination at Lagrange Point 1, where it will observe the solar corona and conduct in-situ observations of the solar wind, among other objectives. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and other officials praised the launch, emphasizing India's commitment to scientific exploration for the benefit of humanity. And Ukraine's Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov has confirmed his departure from his post following President Volodymyr Zelensky's announcement of his dismissal. And Rustem Umerov, the head of Ukraine's State Property Fund, has been nominated as his successor. Reznikov, who played a significant role in lobbying for military equipment from foreign governments and fostering Ukraine's relationship with Western allies, leaves amid a wider anti-corruption drive in Zelensky's administration. And Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan expressed optimism about reviving the Black Sea grain deal during talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The deal, initially brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, aimed to facilitate the export of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea to address global food shortages worsened by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, Russia withdrew from the agreement in July due to obstacles facing its food and fertilizer export, and now discussions are underway to potentially reinstate the deal. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has announced an allocation of 20.7 billion yen, about $141.41 million, to further support the fisheries industry in response to China's complete import ban on Japanese aquatic products. This ban was initiated in the wake of Japan's recent release of treated radioactive water from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. To date, the government had already established 2 funds totaling 80 billion yen to aid in market development and the preservation of excess fish until demand rebounds. With this new funding, drawn from budget reserves, the total support for the fisheries industry will reach 100.7 billion yen, as stated by Kishida. And moving to the United States, where the Department of Transportation's Motor Vehicle Administration, MVA, is expanding language options in the Maryland Driver's Manual and Learner's Permit Knowledge Test. Yoruba, along with 8 other languages, including Tagalog, Amharic, Arabic, Russian, Urdu, Hindi, Farsi, and Portuguese, will be added to the existing list of languages available for this test. Additionally, the MVA is introducing an automated testing system to cater to hearing impaired individuals, allowing them to take the permit exam with questions presented in their chosen language. And British home builders are offering incentives like discounts on down payments and mortgage holidays to boost demand in a sluggish housing market affected by rising interest rates. These incentives, ranging from minimal deposits to free modular kitchens, are aimed at attracting home buyers amid a cost of living crisis that has strained personal finances. Despite a supply shortage, British home prices are expected to fall by 4% in 2023 due to the impact of higher interest rates and living costs, according to Reuters poll, though the decline is less severe than initially feared. And that's the morning news update. Thank you very much for watching. I am Olaoluwa Awe. It's time for analysis, so please enjoy.
The news comes the analysis. First, let me introduce once again. Yes, I introduce this man almost every morning. But yeah, for those who are joining Early Exchange for the very first time, Idausa Osamanze is Director, Policy and Research, African Development Studies Center, and he's here with us. He'll be looking at some of the news stories that have been read, and we'll help you make sense of it. Good morning, sir.
Blessing, good morning.
Good morning. Glad to have you here, Idausa.
You're welcome.
History was recorded in Lagos. The blue rail line for decades, negotiations have been waiting for this opportunity, and that happened a few days ago. How do you feel about it?
I feel great.
And it's
Truly,
also
it's mega city status. It's been realized.
Yes, and what to note is that the Blue Rail Line will accommodate or will move at least 500,000 passengers on a daily to different routes, and the fare cost ranges from 400 naira to 750 naira. So imagine how much that would decongest the ever busy, ever congested roads in Lagos State.
In fact, there was a report done by United Nations that in every hour you have about 80 people visiting Lagos. Lagos is the commercial capital of Nigeria.
Yes.
And so every graduate in Nigeria, once you graduate from school, the next place of destination is Lagos. So if you look at the population of Lagos, you have about 17 million people. And so it's important for us to have an efficient transportational system. So this coming on board is coming at the right time, and for like 4 decades, the anticipation has been there because the facilities in Lagos has been overstretched. And so this coming on board is going to be a relief to Lagosians. And the question now comes in, the question of affordability. But for me, I think if you look at the population of Lagos compared to the facilities you have, there's a need to explore other alternatives. Lagosians, yes, they like to be comfortable in their car, to drive on the road, but everybody can be on the road, and that's why there's a need for alternatives means of transport. And now this coming on board, what it means is I can choose to just park my car and then decide to go on a train. Within 10-15 minutes from mainland to island, I'm there, and that's, for me, it's a good one.
Yeah, really good. I think Jakonde, wherever he is now, must be appreciating and smiling because this vision that he conceived way back, that was frustrated by the 1983 coup, now is being realized. And kudos to the governor of Lagos State, and I was so excited as he was yesterday while riding that blue rail for the first time, and then promising Lagosians that there are many more to come. The red line is on its way, but these are all things that we should celebrate. Lagos for truly center of excellence.
Yes.
One in Africa. And one thing that for me that was also very exciting was the fact that you're going to move between Marina and Mile 2, spending only 30 minutes. That is massive, and it will be at your own peril to carry your car and enter the road when the train is there.
Yes.
But then, of course, we are also praying that it get to our side because this is just side of Lagos. And I'm very jealous.
It should be widespread. It should be widespread.
My two Aziz now coming towards Marina. That's a great release.
Okay, yeah, and Femi talked about Lagos receiving visitors every hour. So I think that the Japa thing actually began with Lagos. People around Nigeria started to Japa to Lagos, and then before they started looking elsewhere. That's just on a light note. As we move further, President Bola Tinubu has endorsed the revival of the Jigi Bola program that is aimed at providing eyeglasses to 5 million Nigerians. Now, this initiative was originally launched during the time that he was governor of Lagos State. So the scheme offers free eye screening, surgical procedures, and eyeglasses to combat preventable blindness among impoverished individuals. So targeting the provision of free eyeglasses to 5 million Nigerians. What's your take, Femi?
The essence of governance is to make life easier for citizens. And in this situation, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, when he was governor, came up with this initiative. There are people, because of their poverty or their financial situation, they can't afford things at buying eyeglasses. And that's why I had to coin that word jiggy, the word, that's the Yoruba word for eyeglasses, jiggy, you know, to customize it and make it liberal and to make it affordable for people who need that service. So he has done that with the mindset of, you know, making life easier for these people. And I think it's an initiative that is commendable. You must understand that several policies were started by Ahmed Tinubu in Lagos, and other states, you know, they've taken example from that.
To replicate.
They've replicated that with some of the economic policies, the financial policies it came up with is a trained auditor, a trained accountant. And so for me, doing that at the national level, it's making it symbolic. And so this is something that started over the years to 5 billion people. You know what it means for someone who can afford to feed himself, to now ask that kind of person to now buy eyeglasses. And now that government has done that for 5 million people, you know, the smiles you're going to bring to the faces of people like that. And so you're bringing governance closer to those people. You're giving them sense of belonging for them to understand that it is not until you get to Abuja or that you are going to be part of the national cake. But with little things like this initiative,
just
like
where
this,
you are, you get a slice of the cake.
That is it.
All right, talking about development, and the Nigeria's value-added tax collection has reached a total of 781.35 billion in the second quarter, and that's a 10.11% increase compared to the previous quarter. Now, the breakdown actually revealed that these payments contributed. Local payments contributed the most, followed by foreign VAT payments, and then we also have import VAT. You've always talked about expanding the tax net rather than just increasing tax. And this time around, VAT collection has seen a 10.11% increase compared to the previous quarter. So that's along the line of your thoughts.
Yeah, for me, it's not just a figure, really. It's also looking at it in terms of its spread. You look at the manufacturing contributing almost about 29% to that figure. Information and communication technology contributing about 21% to that figure, and then followed by the financial services and insurance sector. Now, what does this tell me? There is a whole lot of activity that is going on. Even while people are complaining that there's a whole lot of things not working, what this means is that a lot of value is being added. And we can only hope that more be added. That the more, of course, you see the economy wheel is oiled and activities are going on, of course, revenue will come to the government. And this is a point that we have always made here, that government is a facilitator who creates an enabling environment for businesses to thrive. Don't forget, if businesses are not thriving, the poor cannot breathe.
Okay, so we'll go away from Nigeria, and this time we'll land in Gabon. So the man who led Gabon's military junta, Brice Nguema, has been sworn in as the interim president following the coup that ousted President Ali Bongo Ondimba. So Nguema's inauguration marks the end of the long-standing dominance of the Bongo family in Gabonese politics, but the tenure of the new inaugurated president has not been stated. So, but there are discussions about reform and the transitional period continue. So his swearing in was reportedly celebrated with a military parade and a strong support from civilians. Now, that is one thing that we've seen quite common with coups now in Africa, where the citizens celebrate the ousting of the elected president. But in Gabon now, they have a new interim president sworn in. His tenure is not specified. And part of the reasons that the former Gabonese president was ousted was overstay, so to speak.
Yeah, of course, this is always the military antics. We come in through coup, and then you are transiting into a civilian president, as it were. You see, but the challenge is that whether he's sworn in or he has taken an oath of office, I don't know whether he's going to uphold the constitution of Gabon. That's another question that we will need to settle. A lot of activities will be happening in Gabon, such that, of course, you are going to see constitutional reform, changes are going to be coming here, transition program is going to be put in place. Like you said, we don't know how long. Civilians celebrating.
Yes.
It
is the problem that we face and we are speaking to every day, that people are looking for leadership in Africa. Where this is going to come from, really they don't care. Whether it's from God or from the devil, they really don't mind. People want to see things work. They want to see the healthcare system functioning. They want to see the educational system working. They want to see the transportation system fantastic. Now, this is what people need. They just need simply good life. And who is ever going to make this happen? Of course, people are going to celebrate. We're only hoping here that the hope of the Gabonese will not be dashed by this junta. Because like I've always said, you have to prepare for leadership to be able to offer it. The people are looking up to him with a whole lot of expectation. And then he must live to that expectation.
Interestingly, there are lessons to learn here because it's a question of leadership and governance. There's this type of monarchical kind of leadership in Africa, which is very prevalent in Africa. You see a president, in power for like 10, 20 years. For instance, the president of Biya of Cameroon has been there for like 40 years. That's like a 90-year-old man. And so this calls for concern. And that's why you discover that civilians are sympathetic to the school, even though it's not ideal. Because the worst of civilian rule is better than military regime. And that's, for me, it's key. So there are lessons inherent here, which means that people don't care. From the examples we've had in all this country, you discover that they don't really care where the leaders come from. But what's important is we're providing the leadership, you're providing governance, and if people are getting the dividends of democracy, then there's need for them to coalesce together and support the unity of that country. So for me, the military regime is not going to be the best of governance because over time, the constitution has been suspended. And anything that has to do with governance, good governance, thrives on constitution. So, but in this recent time, you've seen that, and it's a lesson for all African leaders to ensure that you deliver good governance. Constitution is binding. For instance, in a country like Nigeria, you have to be in power as a president or governor for like 4 years. And if you want to do your second term, you do 8 years. But we had a situation where there was a particular president who wanted to do third term. And the crisis that arose from that. And so that's why this area of coup in recent time has been significant. And there's a need for African leaders to sit up and address this issue of governance and this monarchical kind of leadership, where a leader would want to choose to stay in power for like 40 years, for like 30 years. The civilians are tired of this kind of practice, and that's why it has to be addressed. It's a lesson for all African leaders and all leaders across the world.
Yeah, but I really don't want to completely take it that is the monarchy that's the real issue. Yes, I agree to the point of the governance issue, which has not been provided. Now, when you look at African setting very closely, you will see that Africans revere their monarch. When you go to our own stool, for example, in the ancient Benin Kingdom, every Benin man is proud to be associated with a king. Nobody is struggling that title. Now, all that people want to see is that the man is providing justice for everybody. And I think this is a real issue that we need to speak to. Because I don't think that there is a solid nexus between democratic style of representative government or monarchy. Because we have seen elsewhere where monarchy has prospered. We also have seen, like, of course, card-carrying people in Rwanda protesting that their president remain and not change. So, which for me, the real issue here is how do you govern people that people can see justice and equity? How do you deliver, good life to your people? And this is what people are actually looking for. And when you look at Africa, we're really not asking for too much. We want to see people who say one thing or do what they say and say what they do. Now, once we can have integrity and honesty in governance, I'm not too sure that people are really worried about how many years people spend in power. But people are concerned that, of course, let this be bringing value to us. And if this value comes, people will support. But then, yes, democracy has become the bride of all the world, as American is pushing it and everybody must become democratic. But I think also must learn lesson from these systems that somehow the people simply want good life. And the essence of government is to provide good life, security of lives and property, and then the eco-friendly environment for prosperity. That's all government is meant for, and that is what those who are in government should deliver.
For me, I think the key takeaway from this discussion for me is satisfaction of the people.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think leaders must begin to see their people and treat them like clients. The way you own a business and you want to ensure client satisfaction, that is the way you also should ensure that you satisfy your people. And when some leaders are there, they do not want to leave. They say, oh, I have things unfinished, so I have to stay. You need the permission of your people because you can't know what is best for them more than they know what is best for themselves. So if they say at any point in time, we're tired of you or we've had enough of you, then it is time for you to step back, not enforcing yourself on them and say, no, I must be here. There are projects I need to complete. There are things I need to do. Only I can do it. Not only you can do it.
No.
They may just have had enough of your leadership or want to have a taste of someone else's style of leadership. So I think those are the things that African leaders should begin to understand, and we should ensure that there is participation, ensure inclusivity in governance. Where it is you who knows it best for the people, then there is a problem.
Talking about leadership, you know, the essence of leadership is solving problem. You are elected into the office with the presumption that you have the ability, the capacity as a president or as a governor to solve the problem. And so 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, 1 year down the line, the people elected, you discover, oh, the problems are still there, staring at their faces. And then people start raising questions. So leaders, it's important for African leaders to understand the essence of leadership, to make life better, to make things better than the way you make them. You've seen situations where all across Africa, the issue of power supply, the issue of transport system, the issue of infrastructure, you know, has to be addressed. So leaders in Africa needs to understand that there is timeliness to what tasks you're asked to do as a leader. People vote for you with a presumption maybe based on your antecedent that you can solve problems. So African leaders need to understand that the essence of being in governance or being a governor is to solve problems. And the earlier you deliver the dividends of democracy to the people, the more relevant you are as an administrator, as a governor, and as a president.
In a related development, Niger has reopened its airspace for civil and commercial flights after closing it on August 6th when the military coup happened. And due to perceived military invasion, because ECOWAS was talking tough and some other countries were talking tough, so they had to close their airspace, but they have reopened that. But the decision excludes military and special flights which require authorization. Now, economic sanctions imposed by ECOWAS may still limit flights to the country.
Yeah, of course, the yam is not in his hand, neither is the knife.
It's a knife.
So you see, that's the most you can do because the people are already famished right now. A lot of people are already feeling the heat of the ECOWAS sanction. And he can only seems to be looking good. Whether he opens it or not is a question that one would need to really ask of what use will opening the airspace will be that commercial flight will come. Who's going to come right now? Who's going to supply them what they need? And this is going to come from their friends and allies in the West and, of course, in African country. And I think what he should need to do is actually to be very specific on the transition process so that power can be restored. You see, so that democracy is honored in Niger. You are taking power by force. Yes, people celebrated and they wanted to see this happen, but now the pain is coming in. And so people are feeling the impact of the collective sanction against that coup. And I think ECOWAS need to stand their ground until we stop this madness of people taking power by the gun.
Yeah, I think that for countries who may be looking to this, maybe looking to have a coup, maybe disrupt governments because they feel it would be better for them, this is part of the lesson to learn. You know, when they close their airspace, I was wondering at that point, for how long would they hold on? For how long will it remain closed? Because it definitely has economic implications. Can you survive by yourself? No country is an island. So now they've reopened the space. But the thing is, like you mentioned, will other countries be willing to fly into Niger at this time? Because the environment is still tensed. Femi?
Yeah, you see, that's part of what I said when it comes to having military rule. These are some of the downside to it. You know, you have to show. When I saw this story, I was looking at the economic implication to the airlines, to to their workers, payment of salaries. You have to shut down for like almost a few weeks. That is going to affect that airline, the business. And what that means is an average person in that country will always feel the impact. You see, there's always this saying that when two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. In this case, now the two elephants between the military ruling, the military ruler in Niger and ECOWAS, and then the grass that suffers here, they are the people, they are the civilians who are feeling the brunt of the heat of what has happened. And so, for me, it's a good news now that they've opened the airspace and commercial activities are started. And what that means is it's going to be business as usual. And I'm hoping that civilian rule will be restored in Niger, because ECOWAS in recent time has been providing good direction, good leadership, and has been firm about its position, imposing more sanctions, hoping that the military rulers in Niger will come to terms and then ensure that civilian rule is restored in Niger.
Yeah, but I really wish that, of course, the junta really come to the table to engage the president and say, look, this is what we feel should be the ideal. I think the world would have celebrated them. We see infractions and say, look, this is what we think that needs to be in the constitution. For example, we want this constitutional reform. We want a change in this area. We want a change in this area so that the Niger people can be good. And then they supervise that change and then see how it moves. And then we really know that these are transformative leaders. 1 month down the line, what is on the table for the Nigerians to see?
Nothing
in terms of what really you have a mind to do for the people. And this is what I say, you see, opportunists just take on power and they feel, okay, it's my turn to take the largesse of the state. And this cannot help Africa. This cannot help West Africa. And we must be very serious as a people to understand that the atmosphere of peace and safety is the only one that can guarantee development and prosperity.
Okay, still in Africa, but away from matters concerning coup, there's been a protest in Nairobi against the ongoing Africa Climate Summit, where demonstrators claiming it has been co-opted by multinationals and Western governments. Now, the organizers of the protest argue that the summit agenda is dominated by pro-Western corporations and philanthropic organizations, sidelining critical issues and people affected by climate change. Now, they are demanding an African-led expert group to reshape the summit's agenda. Could this be seen as a protest against neocolonization? You know, we talked about neocolonization.
Oh, yes. It is important that African people are beginning to be awake to really question the motive behind some of the initiatives that comes from the West. And I have said that consistently here, that look, yes, we know that all these conversations are good, but we don't have a single contribution to all these, policies initiative. See, for me, it's good to talk about climate change. It's good to talk about its impact and implication on the entire globe. But like the president of China said, when we got to COP25, the whole of Europe said, oh, we are going to release $1 billion US to support African countries to fight climate. Where's the money? Has it been released? So this is the issue, and this is, I think, what the Kenyans are speaking to. Because by the time they got to France earlier this year, the conversation was how to refinance, which of course is going to take more money from Africa. No bringing money into Africa. Whereas the issues that we are dealing with in Africa are caused by the same people and the multinational corporations. Look at oil flaring in Nigeria, for example. There are corporations, the same corporation operating in the West, don't flare gas the way they do in Nigeria. This is the real issue. What are they paying? We're talking about pipelines vandalization, stealing of crude, destroying our environment. All these things happening around these multinational corporations. And I think they too must be held accountable and responsible for the damage that they are doing to our environment. Because they are taking money from us and they are destroying the environment and we can survive. And I think Africa needs to speak more up so that we are not only waiting for the Western countries to set the agendas for us, we must also be involved and included in setting the agenda of what we want happen in our climate and in our environment.
All right, to further talk about this, we'll be having someone who is a delegate at the ongoing Africa Climate Summit after this break. And let's look deeper at how we can localize changes that we want to see in Africa, particularly talks, conversations about climate change and its impact on Africa. That will happen after this break. Just stay tuned. All right, thank you for staying tuned. Now, from the last story that we looked at on the news, which talked about the protest in Nairobi, where there are protests against the ongoing Africa Climate Summit, because the people do not feel that there's enough local inclusion, and they see it's more like it's the multinationals and corporate organizations coming to bring forward their own agenda that does not include the issues that the locals are dealing with, or Africa is dealing with, when it comes to climate change. So we have joining us via Zoom Annie Saike, who is a researcher and writer with a focus on regional economic and geopolitical theme in Asia and Pacific region. He's a delegate right there in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, where he's attending the ongoing Africa Climate Summit. So let's talk to him and get to know exactly what is happening there and what the situation is like. Good morning, Annie. Please unmute yourself. Hello, Annie. Please unmute yourself
good morning.
so we
Thank
can
you
hear
for having me. Can you hear me now?
All right.
Can you hear me
How
now?
are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And yourself? It's a beautiful morning here in Kenya. I'm here at the summit right now and just waiting to get in. But sitting here and really enjoying meeting you.
Okay. Well, there is a report that there are protests in Nairobi against the ongoing Africa Climate Summit. Can you talk to us about it? They say, the report says that the protesters are demanding that an African experts group should lead this summit.
I believe that's very true. I also think that that people should lead, and I think that there should be a greater consent process. I came to Africa. I came to the summit precisely because I'm very excited about where Africa as a region seems to be heading, and I was very enthused when I got here. However, as I've been sitting into the various meetings, I've noticed that it's another top-down consent program, and there hasn't been a lot of space for people to really express themselves, and it feels as though they've already, in terms of the Kenya this declaration that's being signed, or the Nairobi Declaration, it seems as though they've already sort of set the program, and that there has been very little consent amongst the people to provide any kind of substantial input. For me, I think one of the problems is that I see this as a giveaway for Africa's wealth, especially when it comes to our environmental data. Well, not our, but our meaning the collective environmental data, and this is a big problem for me. I do think that at some point, Africa, as well as the Pacific, which is where I'm from, needs to stop giving away our resources.
All right, Annie, you've been in the conference. We would like you to talk to us your observation about the level of participation by Africans, and then what are the strategies that are being put in place to ensure that the issues that are being raised are being accommodated.
I don't see any policies being put in place. I see when you're in these meetings, I see a microphone there, but the meetings are held in such a way that there's no time for any sort of public input. I leave these meetings, with a sense of anger. I mean, not simply because of the lack of public participation, but also because I feel as though I feel as though these environmental programs are really being shoved through.
Okay, I understand that one of the issues that are meant to be discussed at the summit is data localism. Can you talk to us about it and how that would change situations like this, which some persons or some Africans are not pleased with, seeing multinationals, seeing foreign individuals come to Africa to talk to them about climate change, like seeming like they would rather have it, they talk to themselves, or Africans talk to themselves about the effect of climate change?
Well, we should look at data localism as essentially data, data over resources, over water, over food security, over well-being, as being very, very important. And right now, the West is accumulating a vast amount of data through these maritime protected areas, these green spaces, and of course through these carbon trades, and these so-called transparent data trades are essentially are legally binding agreements that are pegged into trade agreements. So our country is going to be able to withdraw from these kinds of agreements? I don't think so, and I think it will be put to the test. Let's see what happens if a country or a group decides to try to withdraw from these data management, data security programs that the West is pushing through. And one of the problems was, is water, and I think water is very, very central. I'm very, I was surprised to hear resource ministers speak so favorably about water privatization, especially when water is such a huge issue here in Africa, particularly in Kenya, and I I understand, for example, I was told the other day, for example, that a U.S. military base had sort of parked itself on top of a water aquifer here in Kenya. And by doing that, I mean, it's well known that military bases, especially in Hawaii, where I'm from, will deposit all kinds of chemicals into the ground without any kind of oversight, and polluting the water. So of course, when we're thinking about data localism, data trades, especially local data trades, we should begin to think about how we collectively, how we are able to really steward our own environmental resources and be able to value our own resources. Because if the West decides to value water according to what Wall Street has recently done in terms of developing their water trades. I mean, those water trades are being valued at California prices. Why California? Because California has fires, California has big agriculture, California has droughts, California has consumers and fracking and so forth and so on. So if we try to if globally, if Wall Street is in any way involved in the water market here in Kenya, which it looks like it will be, I mean, it's going to further alienate people from their access to water. So data localism is, is a way for being able to at least control or steward your own one's own resources.
You've written several articles on data localism. I would like you to talk to us about the trends towards data localism in Africa compared to developed countries like United States of America. And I would like you to also talk about some of the challenges associated with data localism in developing countries.
Thank you for that question. In the United States or in the West, generally, data localism is an impossibility. The program for data is one of accumulation. So there is, I don't know any single incident in the United States where our data is owned. For example, Facebook, I mean, we willingly give away our data. Our health, we willingly give away our health. I mean, so in so many instances, we are giving away this data so that it can be managed by corporations. And of course, as we know, these corporations like Google and Facebook are multi-billion-dollar companies. And we also know that data that data has been added to national accounting systems or the digital as part of the digital economy, which has really given a huge boost to US GDP. Why? And we all here, we're all like giving our data freely, but how is it that that Africa or the Pacific or the Caribbean or Latin America or Southeast Asia, how is it that these regions are not able to account for their data within their own national accounting systems? And it's simply because we're excluded from this because we do not own our data.
So what
and so I think to answer your question about, sorry, go.
All right, what are the challenges associated with standardizing localized data?
Well, one of the challenges is that it doesn't really exist yet. However, how one could standardize data is by letting communities standardize it themselves. I think that for indigenous peoples, for example, this is something that they've been looking to challenge. They've been challenged by the ability to steward over their environmental and their indigenous knowledge, so forth and so on. And so, if indigenous peoples are able to value data upon their own terms, that in itself is a huge boon. That does not necessarily mean that just because an indigenous group might value some particular tree or fruit or an animal at what would be a disproportionately high value according to international markets, that does not necessarily mean that that's a bad thing, because to individuals, or to indigenous peoples or to communities, that value is huge. I mean, it's sacrosanct to their lives. So what we propose is not to measure the value of natural capital, but rather to measure the value of our interactions with restoring our ecological biodiversity. And those restoration values are something that that can be as large or as small as markets will determine. And it is, the point is that we would want to try to eliminate the idea that natural capital or that flora and fauna has a price tag, because if you do put a price tag on flora and fauna, on our ecological biodiversity, then essentially what we're doing is we're essentially putting a value on our bones. We're putting a value on our ancestors. We're putting a value. These are some things that should not be valued, period.
All right.
They're sacrosanct.
There's been growing concerns about the privacy, confidentiality and availability of data. Talk to us about what you think government can do to ensure that the process is transparent, the availability is made easier, most importantly for private companies who want to engage in economic obligations. How can this be mitigated to ensure that using data for economic development will be easier and more efficient?
I don't know if it would be easier and more efficient per se, but at least it would be inclusive, and it would provide the proper consent to communities. But the process is simply to use auditors, regulators. Right now there are armies of environmental accountants who are looking to place a value on our natural capital. However, why not have an army of auditors, to be able to people who understand the consent processes when they enter into communities, who are able to be able to recognize, and at least um, confirm that yes, indeed, that those data points are accurate.
All right.
So,
Okay, go ahead, Annie, please.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead. You're not done talking.
Oh, oh. I meant that was it. It's just these auditors. I can go on and on about indigenous methodologies for entering into communities, for being invited to sit on the mat, for you to sit into communities, for being able to develop these sort of holistic relationships. But I do think that regardless of whether we're talking about indigenous communities or community like inner city communities of even of displaced peoples. I mean, these are all people, and these are all people that have have often suffered through challenges, but and in this time, particularly environmental challenges. And so there should be proper protocols to be able to enter into a space and be able to provide a sense of trust and dignity to these to how data would be valued, rather than simply putting a number onto things and try to have this harmonized to some kind of international system.
All right, talking about Africa, data would mean nothing if it is not acted upon. Now, how can Africa leverage data that they've gotten? And what should be the criteria for government and organizations in terms of resource allocation based on localized ecological data?
That's a good question. Maybe I can sort of pedal that question back a little bit. Right now, in the United States, there are international data, environmental data, has not been fully adopted into its national accounting system. However, it's there. It's in the program. It's in the Bureau of Economic Analysis. They're looking at it. And I suspect that, by 2030, that the United States will indeed begin to adopt environmental data into their national accounting systems. And this probably includes, the other OECD economies. Now, Africa cannot simply do this right now. I mean, they cannot just hold out and say, we are going to implement data local. What needs to happen is there's a few steps that need to happen, and one of them is they need to create a data local market. You have to remember that maybe 15 years ago there was no such thing as a carbon market. Carbon trades. I mean, what are they? I mean, they're essentially allowing the worst industrial economies to be able to essentially keep polluting at the expense of, or by paying this what I would just call a tax to developing countries to plant trees or steward their local biodiversity somehow. But the point is that when the West does it, they're not only planting trees, but what they're doing is they're also owning the data. Well, they're managing the data, meaning that they will be able to account for it in their environmental data packages and in their national data accounting.
All right. Over the years,
and Africa will not be able to do that.
Okay, Annie. Over the years, there have been calls for a harmonized national database for developing countries in Africa plagued with epileptic power supply and, not having the right technology or the technique to harmonize this. How do you think government can find a lasting solution to the issue of harmonized national database?
One of the reasons why, again, that I came, to Africa and to this climate conference is because it's a very exciting time. We're living in this new multilateral environment where supposedly we're living in this new multilateral environment where you have the Western economies and you have the BRICS economies, and having access, and for Africa, particularly the African Development Bank or the African Union, to be in a position now where they're not part and parcel, driven by one monolithic unilateral economy, but now have choices. This is a very good moment for Africa to begin finding the infrastructure, to begin or finding the ability to create revenue, to create a system by which they can develop all of these all of this infrastructure. It does not need to, and this way they'll be able to hang on to it. I mean, I think that the big issue here is when we have these green finance deals, it almost made me weep, when you hear people applauding, like, oh, it's like, this green climate fund has given $8 billion, to this one project, or this $12 billion to this other project. And I'm thinking, like, in terms of this of environmental data, what we're looking at is $100 trillion. And so if somebody gives you like a shaving off of a penny, and which is essentially what that $8 billion is relative to the $100 trillion, that the World Bank has estimated, for this environmental data. I mean, that to me is an insult, and it really made me very, very upset. Made me angry, to see that. And the thing is like, it doesn't take much to just step back, to withdraw. You don't need to sign on to all of these agreements, because, and in fact, I think what government and the negotiator should do is to say, yes, we will accept your $8 billion, but we want to hang on to your data. We want to hang on to our data. And if these carbon traders or these green climate funds, if they decide, like, well, no, I'm sorry, we need to have your data because we need to be able to verify, the data information, then what Africa could do, what communities could do, is, well, we have our own auditors. We have our own auditors who will be able to verify, the information, that the data is correct. And if these climate funds come back and say, no, I'm sorry, we just really need to own this data for harmonization to international standards, then you pretty much know that you're being lied to.
All right, so how can Africa build capacity? Because to be able to insist on using your own data, then you have to be prepared for whatever would happen. What if the fund is withdrawn? So how can, what strategy can be used to encourage corporate social responsibility of companies in Africa to make donations towards funding ecological funds or ecological projects, so that where the data is localized, then the funding can as well be localized?
Well, the creation of data local markets, or just data local market, is something that should be explored. We have, we do have a program, which pretty much uses the most egregious of Wall Street practices, which is default swaps. However, one of the reasons why these default swaps were so terrible was because they were unregulated, or they were minimally regulated. And so a highly regulated default swap is indeed a good program that would include banks, that would include investors, and that would include um, equity holders, meaning the people. I think that there's a variety of different ways with which we could begin to explore um, feasible ways that where international investors can indeed participate in a local market, a local data market.
All right. So even as that's what happened, having a local data market, one of the reasons why the multinationals may not want to use local data is distrust for the data. So what is the strategy or what strategy should be employed to ensure that there is capacity building for the experts and even the community that will participate in the collection and interpretation of the data?
Well, again, I mean, there's indigenous communities being able to value their own their own data, which I think is very, very important, because we want indigenous participation, we want local participation to be able to value their own data. But to turn that question around, I mean, how much do we actually know about carbon markets? How much do we actually know about about the offsets of these carbon trades? How much do we actually know that that the trees, that the billion trees that the governments are planting are indeed going to be able to restore the ecological biodiversity, because often the trees that are planted end up doing more damage to the ecological biodiversity. They're the trees that may not be endemic to a place. And so, I mean, this notion of trust, I mean, is a difficult one. But for myself, I mean, I would want to at least try to engage in trust with local communities, with indigenous peoples, with peoples who actually have a stake in the well-being of their communities and their environments. And I don't really trust wealth consolidating, corporate driven people who have no equity. I mean, other than financial, but who are not, who are not invested in a particular place.
All right, Annie, talk to us. What role should international organizations and research institutions play in this aspect of data localism? And then what role are you expecting them to play to ensure that this become a global phenomenon?
I think for the most part, I mean, these programs already exist. I mean, we have accounting programs, we understand environmental and social responsibility. We, not every, indigenous rights is not necessarily or indigenous values is not something that we know about, but it would not be difficult to create a program that would offer degrees in sustainable and resilient development. The Pacific, there's an institution that is currently that's being created right now called Pacifica Communities University, which used to be Pacific Theological College, and so they themselves are building an ecological program right now to talk about these very issues, incorporating Pacifica philosophies, and of course, spirituality, and I think that it does not need to. A local market does not need to suddenly offer governments billions and billions of dollars overnight. And in fact, I would suggest against it. I think that these markets should be built very slowly, should be built with caution. We should learn. There's going to be mistakes along the way, and people should should learn from them, but local communities, local data markets, banks, they'll be able to determine, like what works and what doesn't work, and be able to, adjust these markets so that they are properly regulated and that everybody benefits.
All right, Annie, thank you for talking with us. We'll go on a quick break and then we'll return to discuss other aspects of data localism and how that will lead us towards ecological accounting.
Oh.
All right, thanks for joining us once again. You're still on to Early Exchange, and we've been talking about data localism. And we've been speaking with Annie, who is right there in Nairobi, a writer and a researcher. Annie, you talked about data localism earlier, and you talked about lessons to be learned in the process of harmonizing this data. I would like you to talk to us how you feel the lessons learned in the process of collecting this data can be shared across continents for agencies of governments and for private sectors to be able to improve on this experience, the observation, and some of the challenges that have been had in the course of harmonizing this data collection over the years.
Currently, I think that what our international institutions tend to do is they tend to do these sort of top-down consent programs, right? Where and much like this climate conference, where they already have a set program, and yet they bring in a lot of youth, they bring in people, they bring in other civil society organizations to begin promoting a particular agenda. I believe that there is also a bottom-up approach. A bottom-up approach may not be as effective, but the thing is it involves the consent programs of people, of cultures, of various communities, and one of the ways in which we could begin to do this, for example, is through our local houses of worship. I think churches, mosques, temples, so on and so on. And then I think that I think they're all, for the most part, fairly well aligned when it comes to stewardship over our ecological biodiversity and our well-being. It is not necessarily for a top-down international institution to be able to to determine what those factors are. And I'm not saying that they all do that, but it's often contained within that model. I do think that a bottom-up approach, there's already a spirit of an ethical spirit, so to speak, or there's already a traditional way of being, or a customary way of being that is being utilized. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially working in the Pacific, is having access to going to villages and seeing how the consent processes work in these villages. So it's when we begin to sort of look at the world as a whole, we have this sort of international centers, but what's happening on the outside, is within the communities. I mean, it's absolutely vast, and I think we should be celebrating not only our biodiversity, but also the diversity of peoples.
All right, so what metrics
and that includes economies as well.
All right, so what metrics can be used to assess the impact of data localism on ecological conservation and sustainable development in Africa? What are the indicators of success
there are ecological offsets
and the impact?
Well, there are well-being indicators, and well-being indicators are certainly something that the individual communities, should be able to determine for themselves. But in terms of ecological indicators, I mean, one of the things that we have found, which is beautifully effective, is to asking one of the elders, what was the fishing, or what was the catch, or what was the fruit, or what was the harvest, 60 years ago, and so they might locate that as 100%. Where are we now? 40%, 30%, 50%. So what happens if you then begin to sort of sit down and think about trying to restore those those numbers so that we'll be able to meet that 100% mark. And we can just call these offsets. And these offsets are 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 fueled essentially by the input of communities, of people on the ground. I mean, we're living in a population with 8, maybe 8 billion. I'm not sure if we hit 8 billion yet. 8 billion people. That's 8 billion pairs of hands. That should be engaged in this restoration program.
Okay.
And why are these hands being excluded?
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's good. Thanks.
All right. Talking about ecological accounting efforts, you identified earlier part of the challenges has to be funding. I still want you to expatiate more on how developing countries, African countries, can manage this shortfall and get the involvement of private sectors. What strategy do you think could be put in place to ensure that these efforts are being utilized the way it ought to be?
Well, I'm not saying that Africa or that any region, needs to suddenly stop with the current program, but I'm suggesting that they need to create an alternative program, and it's an alternative program that can function as a side table to the program that already exists, and whether or not that market, grows and builds, because I do think that a market like this has to develop slowly in order for it to really properly engage all of the consent mechanisms that people demand out of an economy. And so, and also, and in terms of the funding question, I think one of the only major economy that I know of, there could be others, but the main one that we're looking at, for example, is China. So China is a country that is also a country that practices data localism. The West does not. In fact, transparency is the key word. And we often think, well, of course we want transparency. Transparency is great. However, what happens if transparency is not great and transparency is just another form of hegemony? I think that we have, rather than talking about transparency, but transparent systems, we should be talking about consent systems, consensual systems. And this is the program, again, that auditors, regulators, that they can be able to include within their own environmental and social responsibility program.
All right, so how do we ensure sustainability of data localism? That is not something we talk about now because it's become a sort of front burner issue, but it's something that goes on year after year.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you just said.
All right, I'm asking about how to ensure sustainability of data localism in Africa. So it goes beyond a time when it has become a front burner issue, perhaps at the African Climate Summit, but it is continued.
Yes. Sustainability, resilience, development, these are all issues that we want to maintain. It's interesting that sustainability has taken on a whole other meaning, which is sustainable finance, sustainable. And by the way, when we're talking about sustainable finance or sustainable funding, I mean it's not sustainable. I mean we're having to rely upon funders, and which are often another development aid program, which is essentially a boomerang boomerang aid. And so when we're talking about sustainability, we have to talk about real sustainable markets, and those are markets that include communities, that include people. As long as we rely upon external development factors, communities are not going to be able to make the kind of informed decisions that they need to make in terms of restoring their ecological biodiversity or maintaining the stewardship of um, an area that they know best. And um, and as it stands right now, when we're talking about sustainability, how is it that we are relying upon technologies that are essentially developed out of from the Department of Defense to monitor our environments, to provide security? And these are all also terms that also are that exclude the participation of communities to be able to access their environments and to be able to like measure and steward their own their own wealth. It's Data localism is important because ultimately we want communities to be able to have the access, to be able to have the infrastructure to be able to steward their own traditional customary environments.
Right, talking about sustainability, what role do you think the media should play, to ensure sustaining the advocacy in respect to data localism, especially in Africa?
The media, that's a tough one. I mean, I mean, are we talking about independent media or corporate media? I mean, I know that in the West, I think if we're talking about the media, I mean, this is not something that they would want that they would want on their scoreboard at all. In fact, because it does not provide them the kind of corporate benefits or that I think that they would seek. So that may be a more difficult question. But in terms of local media, independent media, simply having the discussion over what is local data, I think is in itself. I mean, if you by having me on your show and talking about this, I mean, that is, this in itself is huge, and if people could begin to think about, yes, data, environmental data, the values of what that means, and how do we protect this? How do we ensure that 5 years from now, 7 years from now, that we will have the kind of access that we'll be able to benefit from our data localism, from data localism, from owning and managing our own data. As it stands now, as is being sort of discussed within the context of the Africa Climate Summit, we may never know that, because again, Africa may simply be giving away its environmental data for $8 billion, $12 billion, when we're talking about $100 trillion market.
All right, on a final note, talking about the ongoing Africa Climate Summit. Now, the demands of the protesters want the agenda of the summit to be reshaped, and they want it to be led by African-led expert group. Now, this is what they want the focus to be on: renewable energy, transparent dialogue between citizens and policy makers, and adequate climate funding. Are there issues, are there plans to make these issues discussed at the climate, to give these people who want a participation of African-led group to channel the issues that are most concerning to to Africa rather? So are there plans to make them front burner issues for discuss?
I myself don't see it, but this is only the second day and it's the morning. I haven't actually stepped foot in the halls. I haven't been participating in any of the meetings today, but from yesterday, no, there hasn't been any kind of real participation other than people meeting, talking, sitting down together, um, exchanging what they're doing, what they're working on. But for myself, in terms of talking about data localism, um, there it's been surprising how many people have embraced this notion and understand and really like understand like like that this should be discussed, and um, and that's good because people are aware of it. And so what it reminds me of is we have experts, especially through UNSCAP and all of the people that are sitting up there, and as they're expressing these and promoting this climate fund, right? Um, they're experts at the 70% of the information, but I feel as though there's 30% information that they do not have. And I feel as though they're being excluded from it. They're not participating in questions around national accounting systems or about the values of economic data, So because they're not engaged in, because they're not having that discussion, all they can do is applaud, that 70% and push forward the 70% with great enthusiasm because it sounds great. It really does sound great to receive $8 billion. But the thing is again, we don't know what 2030 is going to look like. And if we understand what the United States does, if we understand what the BEA does, if we understand what the system of national accounts does within the U.S. Statistical Division, if we understand these things, then suddenly we might just take a pause and we may just begin to ask that one question: can we own our data?
All right, thank you very much, Anisaike Wrighton, researcher who's a delegate at the Africa Climate Summit going on in Nairobi, for being with us on Early Exchange this morning. We thank you for your time.
Thank you very, very much for having me.
It's been our pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
We're going to a quick break and return to look at data, the use of data in another aspect of life. You're going to find out what that is after this break.
In the constantly shifting realm of modern business, Gaining insights into the market trends and customer behavior is of utmost importance. The digital transformation accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic has reshaped customer business interactions, prompting companies to adopt online channels and revamp their marketing approaches. Sustainability has gained momentum, with businesses embracing eco-friendly practices and products, reflecting the rising demand for responsible choices beyond traditional green sectors. Moreover, the era of personalization has enhanced data analytics and AI, enabling businesses to cater for individual customer preferences, boosting customer engagement, and fostering brand loyalty. Consumer behavior likewise has become adaptive as online shopping becomes an integral part of modern life, with consumers expecting seamless online experiences, rapid deliveries, and hassle-free returns, and failing to meet these expectations risks losing customers. One of the factors that led to the shift in consumer behavior was health and wellness awareness, which can be traced to the pandemic, making consumers more health conscious, and this has led to a surge in demand for products promoting well-being, encompassing organic foods, fitness equipment, and mental health services. As social media influence on customers' choices continue to grow, with influencers holding significant sway, consumers mostly rely on recommendations from those they follow, making influencer marketing a potent tool for branding. To thrive in this environment, businesses must continually innovate and align their strategies with these dynamics, ensuring they meet evolving customer needs and preferences. This report was written by Fred Utuize, delivered by Grace Komonafe. Souk News.
All right, thanks for staying tuned to Early Exchange on Souk News. So we've talked extensively about data. So now let's look at how data can be used to predict consumer behavior as well as market trend as we look at the dynamics of the market. Yes, the market is very dynamic because it changes. So it has as the market changes, what are those changes that you are supposed to reciprocate with if you are to continue existing and thriving in that market? Pretty soon we'll be having someone who is a developed economist joining us on the discussion to talk about the dynamics of the market. But before then, I know that Femi as is a customer, even if it's not perhaps someone who trades in something. And so for him, sometimes his preference for a particular product or a particular item, the manufacturer that he wants to deal with or the brand he wants to deal with sometimes changes. So Femi can talk to me about that, so talk to us about that. So when we talk about the dynamics of the market, we understand that the market changes regardless of the sector, whatever kind of market that you deal with. It is not as stagnant. The same approach that you used to thrive in the market maybe some years ago may not be exactly the same thing that happens today. So talk to me about that.
You know, it's often said that the only constant thing in life is change.
Yes.
So that's also peculiar to any human endeavor talking about the market. When you talk about customer behavior, you talk about human trends, they keep evolving over time. For instance, 10 years ago, my policy, my personal taste as regards a particular brand will have been at a particular level. But years after, you discover that it's going to change, because by the time you look at your exposure, the level of environment you find yourself, the level of maturity, your taste, your decision tend to change. So when you talk about consumer behavior, there are several factors that shape that. Now, a few years back, we had the issue of COVID. And, you know, that was so significant when it comes to consumer behavior, the way people consume things. There was a significant shift from the conventional to techno. One of the things that happened immediately after COVID was the shift from the conventional marketing to online marketing. So you discovered that across the whole world, rather than doing the conventional shopping for things, when you go to your shopping mall, you go to your conventional market, people now go online, because that was an eye-opener. In fact, the tsunami hit the whole world, that it has to change our behavior. You know, when you talk about consumer behavior, it talks about decisions we make, when it talks about buying and selling, when it comes to the concept about economic issues. And so one of the significant things that happened in recent time was the issue of COVID, which was like an eye-opener. Unlike before, you prefer to go to your usual conventional market to buy whatever you need, your daily stuff, and now. But now you can do that on your phone because technology is in vogue, which is what COVID did to us at that level. And so over time, there are several factors that have influenced these decisions, and then these are things that will keep evolving over time with people. For instance, in the years past, maybe when I needed to buy any product, it's easier for me to walk to a shopping mall and say, okay, this is my favorite shopping mall. But now I'm more concerned because health-wise, it's also another factor because of what COVID had done. People are more concerned about choices. So you're looking at your weight, you're looking at your mental wellness, you're looking at your health concern. And so it's also important. And we have a guest, and our guest is a researcher and an economic developer, is by the name Emmanuel. Thanks for joining us on today's show, Emmanuel.
All right, before Emmanuel comes in, there's a report put together by, written by Fred Otuizi, and it's going to be presented by Grace Kumulafe. And so the report will talk to us more about consumer behavior, how data has now come into play in predicting or understanding consumer behavior. Let's watch the report and then we'll join Emmanuel, who's our guest.
It is no doubt that two formidable forces that stand as pillars of influence in business around the world is competition and co-opetition. These dynamic duos do not only form the interactions among companies across various industries, but also hold the keys to survival and success in the modern corporate arena. Competition, the age-old adversary, propels companies into a relentless race to outshine their rivals with the objective to gain a coveted competitive advantage by delivering superior products, services, or pricing strategies. In this realm, businesses operate independently, allocating resources to capture market share or maximize immediate gains. On the other hand, co-opetition combines a blend of cooperation and competition. And for this strategy, companies form a united front by harmonizing both collaborative and competitive ends.
In the constantly shifting realm of modern business, gaining insights into the market trends and customer behavior is of utmost importance. The digital transformation accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic has reshaped customer business interactions, prompting companies to adopt online channels and revamp their marketing approaches. Sustainability has gained momentum, with businesses embracing eco-friendly practices and products, reflecting the rising demand for responsible choices beyond traditional grain sectors. Moreover, the era of personalization has enhanced data analytics and AI, enabling businesses to cater for individual customer preferences, boosting customer engagement, and fostering brand loyalty. Consumer behavior likewise has become adaptive as online shopping becomes an integral part of modern life, with consumers expecting seamless online experiences, rapid deliveries, and hassle-free returns, and failing to meet these expectations risks losing customers. One of the factors that led to the shift in consumer behavior was health and wellness awareness, which can be traced to the pandemic, making consumers more health conscious, and this has led to a surge in demand for products promoting well-being, encompassing organic foods, fitness equipment, and mental health services. As social media influence on customers' choices continue to grow, with influencers holding significant sway, consumers mostly rely on recommendations from those they follow, making influencer marketing a potent tool for branding. To thrive in this environment, businesses must continually innovate and align their strategies with these dynamics, ensuring they meet evolving customer needs and preferences. This report was written by Fred Utuize, delivered by Grace Komolafe. Souk News.
All right, thank you for joining us. And that report talked about consumer behavior. All right, now Femi has talked a lot about consumer behavior and given his own experience as example, and the COVID-19 pandemic, how it has also changed the consumer behavior and how a lot of businesses have gone online. So that gives a lot of options for people. Now, when business went online, there's an advantage that came with that. Apart from the fact that businesses can now reach different people in different areas, one of the things that came along with it is data analytics. Because whatever platform that you're using to advertise your goods and services, from that platform, you can now begin to understand the type of customers, the demography of your customer base. So you know if you're getting more customers, for instance, from Nigeria, if you're getting more customers from US, and the age range of these customers. So it helps you adapt your product to suit these people more. So these are some of the benefits that have come with the online, the innovation of online markets, because once that happened, it is not, because people used to employ a kind of feedback mechanism where you maybe leave a box outside, customers can actually write what they want you to do, make suggestions and other things. But with the e-commerce, the advent of e-commerce, the internet does this for you. There are different platforms that set up mechanisms in place to actually feed marketers or business people with this information, and it makes it easier for them.
In fact, that's true. A lot of people thought certain marketing, certain kind of commerce wasn't possible in Nigeria earlier before now. But after that, it was an eye-opener. In fact, as good as your common needs, your everyday needs, you need to buy food, you can get that online. And because the paradigm has shifted online, and you now have a situation where efficiency has brought in, because it's a global village. I can just be in my room in Lagos and then order for something in UK, and then it makes it easier because it's now a global village. So technology has played a larger role in affecting consumer behavior, our attitude to things, our perception about a product. And most importantly, you know, the advantage of social media and the digital, technology has also made it easier and has also harmonized our marketing strategies when it comes to deliveries, when it comes to pleasing your consumer. For instance, as business owner now, over time, you discover that with the advent of social media and social media techniques, you can also suit the needs of your audience, the peculiarity of your audience, to ensure that you're meeting their needs as at when due. So these are things that has shaped, consumer behavior over the years, and for us is a significant progress.
All right, we have Emmanuel Lorenfemi, who is a research manager at Africa Development Study Center. He's also a development economist, joining us via Zoom on the conversation using data for consumer trend and also market dynamics. So let's have Emmanuel. How are you doing this morning? Good morning. Emmanuel, please unmute yourself.
I'm doing great.
Okay, okay.
It's almost there.
Okay. All right, so how can businesses utilize data to study market trends and also consumer behavior?
Okay. There is no way we are going to run a business in this modern day without using data. And how to run it is based on data too. Businesses can run their businesses based on data from the following. Number one, they have to know the model that prevails in a particular market. Take, for example, if you are in information technology business and you want to know how the app you are creating, the market is going to accept it, then you can gather your data through online platform. But if you are agricultural, for example, and your target markets are predominantly local markets, then physical data gathering model will be applied. Having said that, businesses will need to follow data model based on what their objectives are and the mode of their home businesses. I think that is how businesses can measure data.
Okay, Emmanuel, I would like you to expatiate more on the importance of consumer behavior for businesses, especially for emerging businesses, and then the understanding about market trends. What are the impacts and how relevant it is for business owners to understand consumer behavior and market trends?
Yeah, it is very important for business owners to understand the market trend, because there is the end result of whatever they are producing is for them to make sales. Without sales or without asking for their services, there is no way business owner will make profit. So if businesses, they want to thrive in the long term, especially the emerging one, just as you have said, what they need to do is to know what the consumer wants. In behavioral economics, the consumer behavior is determined by needs, by their needs. So whatever the consumer needs per time determine how you form your marketing strategy, how you do how you produce your product, and how you render your services. So knowing the behaviors of, is there emotional attachment to a particular goods or service, or is there a prevailing market indicator that is showing us that, okay, everybody wants to get a particular brand in the market, or a particular part of population or the cohorts, for example, are more likely to take over the demand in the next 5 years. So an emerging company or business will have forecasted all this and say, okay, in the next 5 years, more people will be mobile, more people in terms of mobility online, more people will be analog. All of that will have factored into know the outcome of consumer behavior, and it's going to form part of marketing strategy and the design of goods or service. Thank you.
All right. Now, when you look at the type of data that you can get from interactions of your consumer online, there are different types of data, but are there specific types of data that businesses should be looking at to gain insight into their consumer behavior and preference?
Sure, there should be specific, and everything boils down to the objective. If a company has objective of expanding, for example, probably has been in existence for the last 3 years, and you want to expand to new market, that calls for a new insight to the new market. Let's use Nigeria as an example. If you have been operating in Gombe over the last 3 years, for example, and you want to expand your services to Abuja, that calls for you to know the nitty-gritty of that market in Abuja, so that the model you are using in Gombe that made you to be successful might not be might not be working when you come down to Abuja. So you will have measured it, bring out your questionnaire or your indicators for Abuja in a specific manner. For example, you want to expand and you want to, in the next one year, you want to have at least 100,000 people subscribing to your services. You will know the zone within Abuja area that will require most of your services and the other zones that won't take your services as much. So your energy will be concentrated where you have your higher propensity to succeed. And the other side, you minimize your energy on that. So that is why every business needs to be very specific with what they are looking for in the market. If it's profit-oriented, for example, we want to be existing for maybe 10 years, a company, and you want to make more big money, what is next to be done? You have to look at the analysis of the sector. If it's something that has growth propensity in high rate, then you dive in. You can continue with your investment. But if the growth rate propensity is telling you that, oh, there is likely to be a decline in the market, then the investment in that sector will definitely be withdrawn. Having said that, we know that AI is taking over everything, for example. The IT is taking over, and every sensitive sector is integrating all this new technology into their system. Instead of wasting money on some things that won't bring return quickly or even in the long run, back to the economy, a profit-oriented company will have opted for something more profitable, minimizing the cost and maximizing the profit.
All right, Emmanuel, in reference to the Nigerian economical space, I would like you to elaborate on some of the factors that have influenced the consumer behavior in recent times and in extension to Africa as a continent.
Okay. We have a very particular behavior as consumer in Nigeria, as a Nigerian, and it's a very long one. I will tell you, one of the major factors that affect us, I'm not taking it from the elite point of view, I'm taking it from the general, the larger chunk of our population, is poverty. Because consumer behavior is to measure the buying behavior of every consumer. Everyone wants to buy. That is the nature of a man. No, everyone wants to consume. No man or woman that does not want to consume one thing or the other. As a matter of fact, if you ask an average person to list what he needs to consume, the list is endless. So, and the buying capacity of everyone is limited by the available resources. In Nigeria as a country, we are a consuming nation. And people have talked against this as a measure of why our economy is bad. No. Many countries who are a consuming nation, who happen to produce as well, to make their consumption, they try better. Consumption is a good indicator of an economy. A Chinese economy has been having issue one of the issues Chinese economy has been having in the last 2 quarters is that the consumption is dwindling. Their consumption rate is reducing. They are producing nation, yet the capacity of the economy to consume has reduced because of some other economic indicators. In Nigeria, we have our behavior in terms of consumption is high. Everyone in Nigeria, whether poor, rich, or middle class, want to consume. And that is a good thing for our economy. If the government or every stakeholder in the economy capitalizes on that, the result will be a rapid growth of every sector. In Africa generally, apart from Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, which are the three biggest economies, most of other countries in Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, apart from the North Africa, as their consumption behavior is at the lower end. Nigerians like to buy exotic things. That's why you can see that the rate of iPhone or Apple products in Nigeria is high. It's high. Nigerians like to consume cars. Nigerians like to consume good food, imported.
All right, Femi was just talking about how Nigerians love to consume a wide range of products.
Okay.
All right, Femi, go ahead.
Another one, like I said earlier, poverty undermines this desire that many Nigerians have. So rather, we are unable to express our behavior in terms of consumption. So that is one of the factors. And that is why, in a way, like we are talking about market and data, our labor market needs to be strengthened. The data from the labor market the other day, like 2 weeks ago from MBS, that is Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, shows that our unemployment rate has reduced technically based on the change of model being applied in calculating it. Now, if our consumption capacity is strengthened, you will see Nigerians buy more goods and services, returning to rapid growth of our economy. I haven't said another thing that underlines our consumer behavior is emotion. It has been there all over the time. Why are some people attracted to a particular color of a product? You see that the product is being branded by red and blue. Some people will literally go for the red because they love the color red. Some people will go for the blue because they love the color blue. Those things is one of those things that make people to determine a particular product. Consumer loyalty is another factor. Some consumer, I will take a telecommunication, for example, in Nigeria. You realize that some people stick to one particular product. And this normally happens in oligopoly market. That is a market that consists of few competitors. So the telecommunication industry sector in Nigeria is a perfect example. It's a market where few people made up, less than 5 probably. The giants are not more than 5. Having said that, people are loyal to a particular network than the other based on their perceived emotions towards a particular thing. Even sometimes the network will be making them not to have access to some good services, yet they won't throw away the same. So those are the things basically that determine or that underline how consumer behave. Price is another one. For example, the price can determine whether a consumer go for a good A or a good B. So, and some other things are there too that determine consumer behaviors.
All right. Now, when we talk about collecting and utilizing data by businesses to enable them understand clearly consumer behavior, are there some privacy implications, and how do the consumers themselves react to these concerns?
Okay, there are privacy indications, and data law has been there for us in the last few months. I think it was one of the bills that President Tinubu assented to in his first week in office. It has been there before he resumed office, but he assented to it immediately he resumed. Now, talking about data privacy and consumers, we can't talk enough about it because most of the marketing strategy that companies have come in are derived from this data that they collected, whether from a third party or they directly collected. Now, we have satellite television all over the country. Most of us we are subscribing to one or two, and our names are there, our date of birth is there. There are so many things, information, our locations are there. Now, they can easily plug this thing and conduct analysis of a particular area and make use of it. Well, so far you are protected. What they call abuse in data usage by the company is when information that is given to them on a private note become a public document that everybody can see and can leverage on. Say, for example, if I'm doing a business with someone who is highly placed, I have access to his number, I have access to his company details, I have access to his tax location, I have access to many other things that many billions out there don't have access to. Having access to those data of that person is the law mandated me not to disclose it in any circumstance. So we have the law that protects the consumer from being exposed by the enemy, by people who will use their data to abuse them in any form. So the privacy awareness needs to be ring loud and clear so that the consumer protection is adhered to by every stakeholder who are managing data in their custody.
All right, it's been an interesting conversation with Emmanuel, and Emmanuel is still with us for more conversation. We'll go on a short breakdown, and when we return, we're going to have more discussions. Stay with us. All right, glad to have you join us once again. The conversation is getting more engaging, it's getting more interesting. And we've had Emmanuel, and Emmanuel is still with us. Earlier he was talking about consumer behavior, the patterns that are peculiar to consumer behavior in Nigeria and by extension to Africa. And now we want to dovetail into another important discussion where we'll talk about the role of competition when it comes to emerging markets and how business owners can take advantage of that. We still have Emmanuel Olorunfemi with us. He's a research manager. Emmanuel, let me start on this note by asking if I would like you to talk about the concept of competition, the role of competition when it comes to emerging markets, and how or why is this important for a business owner to understand the concept of competition, the dynamism, and how to take advantage of this in moving the business to another level?
All right. The concept of competition has been here since the classical time in the field of behavioral economics. And there is no way you want to start a business or you want to run a successful business that will give you money as you want without understanding concepts that surround competition. There is a particular popular theory in economics, a market structure, which is called competitive market, perfectly competitive market, which is not realistic though. It's just a model that's being used to describe how economy works in a certain way that can be used to structure businesses when they are coming up. Now, the concept is basically what will make me a successful business person. So there is no way, if you are having a product A and product B, and product, okay, let's use this narrative. You have 3G and you have 5G. There is no marketing strategy, for example, that you want to apply, except in an common situation that someone in an urban sector will go for 3G and leave 5G and 5G behind. No, because the development of the product we call 5G today has factored in so many things that are not there before, and it has given it competitive edge over other Gs, existing Gs. And that is for emerging market or businesses. It is very, very crucial. It's not because people go into business because popular and demand is high in a particular sector today. No. It might be a reason to start a new business, but it shouldn't be a reason to develop business. Business strategy should be formed based on competitiveness. That is why World Bank, before they stopped it, said about 2 years ago, because of some scandal that happened within competitiveness indicator. Over the last 12, 13 years thereabouts, every year used to tell us how competitive an economy is. Nigeria used to rate somehow bad, but before the publication of stocks, we were doing better. So if an economy can be rated on competitiveness, the same thing happens to every business. Even if it is trade you want to engage in, you still need to be competitive. What are the things that in the market that you belong to that are not there and that people need? That is what you capitalize on, and that makes you competitive.
All right, can you tell us some competitive strategies that businesses can employ?
Okay, to start with, we still need to go back to the data. The first and foremost things to do is to design a strategy to how to collect a data that you've identified that is wanting in that market that you want to start business in. So if you have a market, let's say in Nigeria now, people, let's say clothing industry, fashion, that literally deal with fabrics. Okay, these are our attires. We wear this, we wear that, we wear that. Okay, what are the things that this particular the trend in the new market are looking up to. For example, you don't expect people who are born in 80s to dress the same way with people who are born in 2000. So the population cohort always creates its own market. You will know that, oh, I want to dress people from 20s upward, or I want to dress people from 80 upward. It depends. So based on the cultural values and some other indicator, you design what you want to get from that market. And you ask questions from your prospective consumers. So that is one of the basic strategies. The second one, that has to do with primary data, the one I just finished with. The second one is leveraging. If you don't have resources to do that, you can leverage on some publication. You can do your desk review. You can collect different data from secondary sources and the trend, and you simulate them, and you come analysis from them, and you make your decision. And some can even be just engaging in something similar to focus group discussion. You can gather 2 people, 3, 4, 5, up to 8 in a room and have a critical discussion about that market and the ideas that are coming up. You validated them with the data that you are going to get, or secondary data, or research publication over the places that you can use to strengthen the idea. Having done that, you will be able to come out with a competitive product or services. It does not align to product alone. It's also, if you are rendering services, service sector is big in Nigeria now. So virtually everything that we do, we need one assistance or the other from the service provider. Then your service should be designed, should be delivered in such a way that your consumer will literally come back to you based on what you are delivering. Those are the 3 basic strategies that any emerging business can apply.
All right. As a follow-up to your submission, which we talked about the process of data collation, I would like you to talk about some of your findings or the peculiarity you have found out in this climb when it comes to data collection, and then how can a business owner take advantage of this shortfall, to mitigate against the impact of maintaining competition in the market?
Okay, thank you. Now, one of the work we work here at African Development Study Center has to border on market supply and demand before this administration came in May. And the bottom line of our research, basically to review the demand and supply in the last 5 years, was to know those indicators, those components of market that need to be strengthened. Now, we discovered that because we focus more on risk sector, the research design was basically on risk sector, not much on service sector. Risk sector are like agricultural and manufacturing sector. Now we discover from export data from World Bank and NBS and CBN in Nigeria shows that our agriculture, after oil and gas, which we don't focus, we literally focus on the 3 sectors, like I said, literally shows that agricultural products has been our main export from 2017 to 2022. When you take oil and gas away, the next thing that you're going to see is not manufacturer products as far as risk.
All right, there's some glitch there. We'll return to Emmanuel Olorifemi when that is resolved. It's a very stormy weather over here in Lagos, at this part of Lagos, so perhaps that's why. Okay, Emmanuel's back. Emmanuel, go ahead. All right, so Talking about competition, we know that competition is rivalry, focused on rivalry and gaining competitive advantage over others. But some companies have been accused of unfair competitive practices. So that means that there are some ethical considerations to being competitive or even competing. What are some of the things that you think some companies should consider, or companies should consider when trying to be competitive?
You must understand that is a pool of opportunities. No marketer, no business owner will wait for the other person. So it's just for you as a business owner to be able to strategize, because you must understand the peculiarity of your product, of what you're doing, the demands of your customer, and how to mitigate the effect of meeting their needs. So having your own business strategy to understand that the kind of strategy you need to put in place to be able to compete with other players. The truth is, it's important for you to also, in that niche of your business, to understand what your competitors are doing. As a result of that, you'll be able to strategize, to be able to improve on what you're doing. But basically, like even in normal human endeavors, you have rivalry, which is part of human nature. It's also applicable to businesses where some people will feel the big players are maintaining dominance over the small players, but nobody will give space for the other. You must understand it's a global, like they often say, the sky is big enough for businesses to fly. So it's for you as a business owner to own your process, your strategy, and ensure that you understand the trends in the market and get whatever, like what Emmanuel was making reference to, the issue of data peculiar to your products, peculiar to your niche, peculiar to your customers. Take advantage of that. Why you are playing at your own smaller space in respect to that of others is a matter of time. Your strategy will pay off. So, but you must understand as a business owner the importance of having strategy when it comes to competition, because it's an entity you can't do without. It's a global phenomenon, which it's a global thing. Whether you are playing in the local scene or you are playing in the global scene, competition is a universal language.
All right, Emmanuel is back. And Emmanuel, thank you for staying with us.
Thank you for having me.
How's the weather in Abuja? Because it's raining here.
The weather is cool.
Okay.
Not raining yet, but the weather is cloudy.
Oh, okay. All right. Now, so
yeah.
While you were, when that glitch happened and you were away, we're talking about ethical considerations in competition, because while competition is focused on rivalry and gaining competitive advantage over the other business, some companies have been accused of unfair competitive practices. So what are the ethical considerations?
Yeah, as a baseline to that question, I would like to say that in a capitalist system that Nigeria is operating, there is no room for non-competition. As a matter of fact, the main thing that can drive an economy to the highest is competition. Unfair competition happens. The big corporation, most of the time, takes the ideas from a rookie and turn it to good. So that is an ethical issue. And there's no way that we are going to talk about this without the lesser company being aware of some certain things. If you have a beautiful idea related to your competitor, how you expose yourself matters, because when they take hold of it, they have all the power and the institution to make use of it. But there are ethical issues that many people don't abide by. And that is why our institution needs to be strengthening, that the complaints of an individual will be aired and will be corrected. Without that being in place, if the big corporation can get away with taking talent from unfairly, for example, some big corporations take talent from other smaller companies and use the model that fellow is applying there to bolster their own growth objective, or to undermine the market in a way. And that was what often happens in cryptocurrency, for example. The powerful one that is holding the big share of the market can decide to undermine it and crumble it to some extent and gain it back in the next few days. So the ethical behavior is mainly on the big corporation, not for the smaller um, businesses. But to protect that, there should be a referee, which is government institution, that monitors complaints. And on the other hand, the smaller businesses have to be aware of the strategies not to let their products being taken over by their big competitors.
All right, Emmanuel, let's take a shift from competition now and talk about co-opetition. I would like you to talk about the relevance of co-opetition to competition and for an average business owner to understand the concept and how to take advantage of it in reference to the concept of competition.
All right, there is no company that can render all services to itself. And that is why, even in competition, there should be cooperation. So, if I'm like, take for example, the aviation industry, there is no airline that can meet all its services by itself that is provided to passengers. So, in the area of strength, you capitalize on it. Where you are not sufficient at a particular time, you cooperate with another entity and work together to propel the growth. Because cooperation actually results in multiple growth indices. If businesses are emerging today, for example, new businesses, one of the things as indicator is their partners. It's not only government or NGOs that are partners these days. Collaboration and working together with other similar companies, not just the one that is not even similar companies, foster growth faster than when one company is working in silo. Therefore, cooperation is very important, even if you have competitive mindset towards the market. You still need to cooperate with other stakeholders within the market to foster growth and development for that company.
All right, quickly, Emmanuel, in 1 minute, can you tell us what are the challenges with co-opetition? But because you just talked about the many advantages, but in spite of that, some companies are still afraid to co-opete.
Yes, actually there is challenge. The main thing is distrust based on past experiences. We've seen corporations, tons of lawsuits within corporations between businesses as a result of breach in their contract. So cooperation involves coming together and sometimes even forming a conglomerate. Having done that, still the part that some other party need to keep, most of the time they won't abide by it, and they will break whatever they agree to do. And that is the main issue that made many businesses to withdraw from cooperating with their competitors. But long and short of the story, the fact is that whenever a company wants to enter into a corporation, do your due diligence. McKinsey published an article just a few months ago, and it deals with how partnership end in the next 10 years. It was a review of some corporations going into thousands of them in America. Now, the outcome was they broke it down into 4. The number one aspect that people don't focus on when it comes to merging together is that they fail to actually analyze their objective critically. And in the few years to come, that becomes a bottleneck for their growth. In fact, that is one of the major reasons that many of them end in court. So if there should be a corporation, the due diligence has to be done in such a way that every part of that company has to be x-rayed first before even entering into agreement of that maybe we are going to do business or not. In the process of extracting the objectives, the company will sit back. Should we go ahead with this merger or with this corporation, or should we stay put?
All right.
Thank you.
Emmanuel, that's Emmanuel Olorunfemi. Thank you so much for sharing your thought with us. It's been an interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll go on a short break now, and when we return, we're still going to have more discussion. It's getting more engaging. Don't go away.
All right, thanks for staying tuned. We've been talking about market dynamics. We've looked at consumer behavior and market trends, the role data plays in helping businesses to understand this. And we just talked about competition and a little about co-opetition. I guess perhaps this is the first time you've ever heard about co-opetition. All right, now let's look at government regulation, because government plays a pivotal role in shaping market dynamics. To talk about this with us, we have Sam Oroji, who is Director, Research Policy and Development, Femi Watch Limited, owners of Sook News and Watch Radio. Good morning, sir.
Blessing, good morning. Thank you for having me, Femi.
Glad to have you here, Sam.
So let's begin with the regulatory framework. So what should be an ideal regulatory framework for businesses?
Thank you very much indeed. The key is that for every sector or every business, there are legal framework that set up those businesses. And government has a major role in trying to moderate the way people play in those markets. So for each sector, for example, if you're talking about financial services, for commercial banks and other financial service sector within that sector is regulated by the central bank. If you're talking about capital market, you talk about the Security and Exchange Commission and a host of other regulatory agencies. The idea is for people to play by the rule of engagement in those businesses. Therefore, government has a major role to regulate those sectors so that illegal transactions are not sustained in any sector. Therefore, consumers are equally protected by the regulatory agencies that are saddled with the responsibility for each sector. So as we advance the conversation, we'll be able to speak to specific issues and specific area in terms of regulatory frameworks that sustain those sectors.
Talking about regulatory framework, like you said, we need to. I would like you to, do an assessment of the government agency as far as Nigeria is concerned. How effective they've been in area of, regulation with some of the policies. I think over time we've seen several policies, but how have we been able to harmonize this policy towards economic development in a country like Nigeria?
I think the regulatory frameworks are there, and those agencies that are saddled with the responsibility for managing those sectors have been doing their best. However, because of market dynamics, there are changes in the industry that come from time to time. Then they must up their game in terms of new challenges that come up in those businesses, and they're able to react to those businesses to be able to forestall infraction into business practices. So for policy regime, okay, then there are changing dynamics in the market and they must respond quickly to those changes in dynamics, particularly the impact of technology in times of regulation. for specific sectors and industry. I think they are doing their best, and we need to just constantly improve on the way we regulate so that the market are sustained over a period of time.
As a follow-up to that question, you know, the issue of ease of doing business in Nigeria has been of concern. Now, what do you expect of these government agencies to do? How far have we gone as a country when it comes to ease of doing business? Because as we speak, our rating is not that impressive. How far have we gone as a country when it comes to the ease of doing business? And what do you expect that these government agencies should do to ensure that our statistics, our rating, are upgraded?
All right, thank you, Femi. I think what is key here in terms of how far are we doing, we want inter-agency collaborations, particularly Department of Government, in order to ease the way we do business in the country. So therefore, there are issues of multiple taxation, inter-rivalries among agencies in what they do. So what we need to do to be able to stay sustainable in terms of regulation, there must be collaborations among agencies of government and find a way to have a common ground in terms of the regulatory framework that they push ahead so that people can do business sustainably and we have more investors coming in. Therefore, in the final analysis, what is key is how do we regulate in order to ease the way we do business as a country, and that we be able to bring in more direct foreign investment. Then the domestic operator too will quality up their game in the way they are able to expand the business environment.
So the need for government regulation cannot be overemphasized, but how can government achieve a balance between regulating and also promote entrepreneurship and innovation?
No, I think there are various agencies of government, like we just mentioned earlier. The small and medium enterprises have their responsibility in terms to see how they can improve in terms of business development, particularly small and medium enterprises. So that's on the one hand. Then on the other hand, regulator must isolate themselves from what they do in the industry so that there's no infraction that disturb what they do in those businesses.
There's this argument that as far as Nigeria is concerned, an extension to the African space, the issue is not the absence of laws or regulations, but the willpower to implement these laws and to ensure that certain individuals are not being given preference. What's your perspective about this?
I think the issue is that some of the operators in the industry, they were industry, some now become regulators. So we need to distinguish between core regulation and those who are in businesses. So the government must find a way to strike a balance between the level of regulation that they do in specific sector and those who are in practice in those businesses. That's the only way we can have transparency, accountability, and credibility in terms of regulatory practice.
Let's talk about labor market regulations. So how do policies that concerns minimum wage, for instance, impact market dynamics?
All right, if you look at minimum wage, that's what you call COLA. That's cost of living adjustment that you have to make in terms of wages and salary. So that's, again, is dependent by inflation. So what you do most of the time, you must respond to the changing dynamics of the market. What are the inflationary indicator in the market? So you adjust appropriately, but the equally regulatory framework that regulates labor practice, and those practices must be sustained so that people are able to earn what is due, particularly from private sector. Government on its own must equally look at its own house to clean up in terms of how they can increase the wages of public and civil servants.
All right, thank you very much, Sam Oroji, for talking with us. But before we go, let's look at regulation when it comes to competition. Because before we got on to this discussion, we've talked with Femi, we talked with Olorunfemi Emmanuel on competition. And one of the issues that was raised was that some companies have been accused of unfair competitive practices. So are there regulations, for instance, that address such? preventing them from happening? And where they do happen, the follow-up actions?
Oh yes, there are very regulatory agencies. Okay, let's take the insurance industry, for example. If you do what they call rate undercutting, the regulatory agency had to sanction you, even the banks as well. So once those infractions are discovered, various agencies that regulate specific sectors always bring the big stick at the end of the day to. But what is important is that for competition, for you to remain competitive, you must play by the rule in the industry. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Samuel Uje, who is Director, Research, Policy and Development, Femi Wash Limited, owners of Sick News and Wash Radio. That's been the show today. I guess it's been very exciting for you, as it has been for I and Femi today. The show will return tomorrow, 7 a.m. West African time. I am Blessing AJ. Now, this is a reminder that Business Insight will come your way at 10 o'clock with Olaoluwa Awe. Femi?
It's been an interesting time, and it's been an engaging conversation. And don't forget, we'll still return tomorrow, and it's an ongoing thing. The conversation continues. Enjoy your day.